There is a screen, a very familiar one to many of you, while at the same time being quite foreign to others. After the credits, before the credits, in some cases the game won't even inform you about it. It'll be hidden in the menu, merged into it. Two words and a plus sign. And more often than not, when you click it, you've done so without giving any serious thought to what you're agreeing to. New Game Plus. Play again, but not exactly starting over. What I'd like to meditate on, and certainly not try to explain, is precisely what's going on with this little plus symbol. Of course, it's essentially a marketing term, a way to indicate more content. However, I also believe it's pointing at something far more bizarre than just that. Something I believe we can trace to a structure of time that philosophers spent thousands of years trying to describe. And I'm fairly certain that video games accidentally, upon seeing this structure, simply continue to utilize it without ever truly realizing the magnitude of what they were working with. If you've never played it, it is From Software's 2019 game set in feudal Japan where you control a shinobi named Wolf, and the game revolves around combat that is at its peak unyieldingly difficult. Not in the same way Dark Souls is unyieldingly difficult. Sekiro is asking something particular of you. Sekiro utilizes a deflection mechanic, which is not blocking, where you use your blade to meet incoming force perfectly timed. You're not taking damage, you're not dodging every attack, you're answering each and every attack with an opposing force in perfect syncopation with the rhythm of the battle. The majority of the players during their first run aren't actively performing this action, or they perform it as a last resort, once they figure out that there is no other way of beating this boss without chipping at their posture. Early in the game, you primarily spend your time reading, waiting, studying your opponent's attack patterns to determine when they will reveal themselves through the flashing red kanji alerting you that something is coming at you that cannot be deflected and reacting accordingly. The game instructs you to fear prior to teaching you anything else. This is acceptable and logical. This is how a game works. Genichiro, who I would consider as your first real barrier within Sekiro, serves as a lesson to you regarding this exact fact. You are smaller, you react, you scramble. A good amount of what you accomplish initially is merely survival. Now, picture yourself in your second run, or your third. In my case, however large a number that was until something genuinely changed. Within a New Game Plus boss fight, let's say Ishin the Sword Saint because his fight is so incredible and super intricate, there is a moment wherein I realized I was no longer waiting. I didn't mean I had memorized his move list, although I had. I mean something in regard to the nature of my awareness had changed. I was no longer observing for a signal, I was countering the force as it came. The deflection was not a reaction, it was something akin to an assertion, as if I was the one establishing the rhythm of the fight and he was following me. The same inputs, the same animation, yet somehow played from an entirely distinct position within the action. Obviously, the reason why that occurred is simply due to the accumulation of skills. The repetition leads to improvement, which is true, but it is also somewhat insufficient. As I wish to ask, what type of better? What actually changed? And what significance does this alteration have in reference to both the separate runs and the hard reset provided by a New Game Plus? As odd as they may seem, the game eliminated everything. You lose most of your levels, the world retains no recollection of your passage through it previously, all NPCs repeat their original lines, each boss initiates with the identical animations, and you, once again, begin. You begin anew, but you're not the same individual who began the first time. Now, Nietzsche had a concept known as the eternal return. Many people know of the eternal return as a cosmic recycling machine. All things past are going to recur forever, as a torturous return of all the mundane and exciting, painful and happy, good and bad experiences you ever had, ad infinitum. This view typically brings either a great deal of fear or nihilism. Everything you ever did, the life you live now, will occur over and over again. Now, Gilles Deleuze, who studied and intricately reinterpreted Nietzsche at length throughout much of his own career, presents an argument that the common conception of the eternal return is nearly entirely incorrect. Not just somewhat incorrect, it is nearly the exact opposite of what Nietzsche was arguing. Nietzsche argued that the eternal return would not bring us back to the same. It is selective. It wipes away the mere average and reactive. It wipes away anything that cannot define itself except by opposing another. Wipes away anything that is merely reactive and lets the active, the affirmative, the becoming return. When it returns, it is always as some variant of what existed previously, always as something different. The return is how difference is created and affirmed. What returns in the eternal return is not the same, but difference itself. Think about that for just a minute. The eternal return is not telling us all events recur, nothing matters. We are caught in an endless loop. It is telling us instead that only those entities that have become, only those that have truly been transformed, can recur. Those that remain unchanged, the same, cannot recur. These lack the power to recur. The reactive, the force that only exists to respond to stimuli, the force that defines itself solely against other stimuli, these are removed. They do not return. So here is why Sekiro is so important to this discussion. Deleuze, when discussing the role of the eternal return according to Nietzsche, distinguishes between active and reactive forces. This is not a moral distinction. This is not a question of whether one chooses to act passively or actively. Reactive forces are those that define themselves primarily in relation to what they are reacting to. These forces require an outside source of stimulation. They exist for the purpose of adapting, adjusting, and/or surviving whatever is coming at them. Active forces, however, represent forces that take action to their limit. Active forces are self-sustaining and create their own forms and boundaries rather than accepting those imposed by others. Your first playthrough of Sekiro likely represents a reaction in exactly the same manner. The game provides you with stimuli and you react. The boss hits you and you react. A red kanji appears above your head and you dodge. You're not incorrect to do so. Many of these moves are both practical and skilled, but your relationship with the battle space itself is reactive. The boss is dictating the parameters of the battle space, and your actions are defined by how well you fit into that battle space. Repeated passage through Sekiro, i.e. New Game Plus, New Game Plus 2, New Game Plus 3, and so on, is not merely creating a catalog of responses. Something more interesting is happening. As you continue to die and return to battle spaces, repeatedly engaging from differing vantage points until each becomes familiar, your interaction changes from reactive to active. You no longer wait for Ishin to make his next move. You begin to dictate a rhythm to the battle space. Your ability to deflect Ishin's blows ceases to be a simple reaction to impending force and begins to resemble a dialogue, an exchange between two forces at the moment of collision. New Game Plus, while it continues to raise the stakes, increasing enemy HP, increasing enemy damage, increasing enemy aggression, specifically creates an environment in which your reliance on reacting to what is presented to you is made increasingly futile. If you attempt to complete New Game Plus 3 using strategies employed during your first playthrough, strategies that emphasize pure survival or waiting for the opponent's move, you will lose. The game is actively selecting for the active. It is creating an environment that rewards reactive behavior less and less, making it more and more difficult to survive using such tactics, forcing players into new behaviors. The Eternal Return selects. It eliminates the possibility of that which can only exist in the mode of repetition, the adaptive, the conservative, the reactive, allowing only that which can create difference to return. In Sekiro, the New Game Plus system creates the selection process. It is not providing additional repetition, it is providing a challenge. And in order for a player to successfully meet this challenge, they must have undergone a change. But now I would also like to consider how we can complicate this a bit. Since Sekiro only illustrates what the Eternal Return does to the player, that is that the world of Sekiro does not really remember your prior attempts of traversing through it, each run is new each time you start. But I'd like to consider what happens when the world does remember. In addition to being well known for its story and gameplay, too much has been written about Undertale since it was released in 2015. So perhaps after a few years of being written into meaninglessness, it may be stupid of me to take this mantle up again. It may be like beating a dead horse. However, I would like to explore one particular aspect of Undertale's structural design that I believe isn't explored with sufficient seriousness. Undertale remembers. Not in a narrative sense, mechanically and structurally. If you go through the game once as a complete force of destruction, that is, kill everything, run through the game completely as an engine of destruction and chaos, the genocide one, and then reset and decide to run through the game again in peace by talking with characters and saving them and so on, that is the pacifist run, Undertale remembers. Flowey remembers. The final boss of the pacifist route, Asriel, remembers. In the sense that their interactions are structured differently depending upon whether you have previously played the game with a genocide route. Therefore, Undertale develops a scar across resets. The slate does not clean itself entirely. And this represents the opposite of Sekiro's structure, and it is revealing something that Sekiro does not. According to Deleuze, and this comes from Difference in Repetition, the more technical text, repetition is described by Deleuze as not one single process, but as three. That is, three different types of relations between repetition and time. Firstly, we have habit, the living present. Habit is the most typical sort of repetition. You repeat actions and they contract something from those actions. Something accumulates. You becoming better and better at deflecting is formed through this process. The hand becomes a learned. The present is enhanced by what has been repeated within it. Habitually speaking, repetition occurs at the level of the body or the organism and is therefore the foundation of our most direct experiences with time, that is, the current moment enriched by what feeds into it. Secondly, we have memory, the pure past. And this may seem a little bit unusual. Deleuze argues that the past is not simply what the present was, that is, it's not simply a former present. He argues that the past has its own state of being that exists independently of any present that recalls it. The pure past is not recalled through memory, it is the condition for memory. Every present moment flows into the past, but the past as such exists before any present recollects it. That is, time as depth and not as mere succession. Now thirdly, we have the empty form of time. This is what Deleuze considers as the one concerning the future, the eternal return. And Deleuze is quite explicit regarding this. The eternal return relates only to one dimension of time and not equally to all three dimensions of time. Specifically, it relates to the future. It is what repetition appears as when both habitually formed present and remembered past have been burned off. When it is not related to either what has contracted by virtue of the organism nor what lies on the ground, but rather to what the new generates. Now take Flowey. Flowey is a character who has the ability to reset. He discovered the save button, which means he has the power to reset timelines. and he used it obsessively, going through every possible route, encounter, and choice hundreds of times, and it destroyed him. He ended up empty, nihilistic, performing cruelty not because he wanted anything, but because he had run out of genuine wanting. The power to repeat without consequence, without genuine stakes, without the possibility of real loss, hollowed him out. Now, this is exactly what Deleuze, reading Nietzsche, describes when he talks about what fails the test of the eternal return. The reactive fails it. The thing that can only repeat in the mode of survival, of accommodation. I've seen this before and I know how to get through it. This is what the eternal return filters out. Flowey is a pure expression of reactive repetition. He has been through everything. Nothing genuinely returns for him because there is nothing active left in him to return. He has optimized out of becoming. And the game knows this. Undertale mechanically has built an architecture in which your previous playthroughs matter, not as memory you consciously carry, but as scars that the world carries for you. If you genocided everyone and then tried to come back as if nothing happened, the world doesn't let you. Flowey doesn't let you. The game is insisting there is a past here that you cannot simply overwrite. The reactive attempt to return to an earlier state, to start over as if the slate were clean, is precisely what the eternal return refuses. Now, what the pacifist route offers, on the other hand, is closer to the active. You're asked to find routes through encounters that don't destroy. You're asked to see differently, to engage with what is in front of you rather than simply negate it. And when you achieve the true pacifist ending and Azrael says he hopes you'll be happy, the tone is genuinely final. Not because the game locks you out, it doesn't, but because something has been completed that has the quality of completion. The becoming arrived somewhere. The becoming became something. What I find most precise about Undertale in this framework is Flowey's diagnosis of himself. He tells you that when he first got the ability to reset, he used it to try and befriend everyone, to do everything right, to achieve a perfect run. And at some point, which he can't exactly say when, it stopped meaning anything. The acts that had been genuine became performance. He could imitate care without feeling anything. And then cruelty, at least, produced some kind of reaction in him, some confirmation that he was still alive. This is reactive force at its most extreme. The will to power curdled into pure negation, into the desire to negate the difference of others because the self has lost the capacity to affirm its own. The eternal return would not bring Flowey back. Flowey is not what can return. But let's not stop here. How can I ever make a video without it eventually touching upon a piece of media that has refused to part ways with me for years now? Hideaki Anno started releasing the rebuild of Evangelion in 2007. Coming to an end in 2021, these 4 films retold the story of the 1995 anime series he created during a severe depression. The last 2 episodes of the original series was Anno essentially collapsing under his own weight while trying to finish the series due to the lack of funding. Evangelion was a documentation of someone getting through creating a work under severe pressure and discomfort, and that discomfort is still there today. Anno returned to Evangelion after a decade with money, a team, and 12 more years of life experience. He created 4 films. The structural element I'm interested in is not the content of the films, the Eva lore, the ending discourse, and so on. Whether or not 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time provides a satisfying conclusion isn't relevant to me. What Anno did with these 4 films is not a remake. It is not a reimagining. It is not an adaptation. None of these terms apply well to the work. It continues to fall into none of these categories, causing unease among critics and, quite frankly, anger among fans. Structurally, Anno created a new game plus. Consider what this actually means. You begin with the first film, You Are Not Alone, and you're in completely familiar territory if you've watched the original series. The first few episodes are largely identical to the film. The animation is better, pacing is slightly altered, however the similarities are unmistakable. You can almost feel like you're watching a remake. Then, the second film, You Cannot Advance. This one diverges. Elements that existed in the original series do not exist here. Elements that did not exist before do. Character behavior has changed. The notion of a remake begins to crumble. Then comes the third film, You Cannot Redo. This film caused many fans to become enraged, to wonder why Anno took such a drastic turn from the original series. Many fans declared the project failed, because by the time you get to You Cannot Redo, something has already occurred in between films 2 and 3 that the films themselves can never depict. Catastrophe. The world is fundamentally different. All characters appear 14 years older and regard Shinji with an almost wounded suspicion that neither Shinji nor you as a viewer can fully explain. You find yourself in the place of missing a full playthrough. You go into You Cannot Redo as though you have just started a new game plus and your first game never happened. This is a particular form of confusion, and it wasn't accidental. Anno deliberately produced this feeling by placing viewers in the position of returning to something and finding that time has passed without them. The world contains wounds that developed over time you were absent from. Characters possess histories with you or with a version of you that you have no recollection of. Kaoru states in You Cannot Redo, "It will be different this time." What that phrase, "this time," accomplishes is quite remarkable. It is a demon in Nietzsche's Eternal Return. It is a soft whisper on the outside edge of the Eternal Return. Would you relive this again? If so, would you will it? Finally, Thrice Upon a Time, the fourth film, is Anno, old, healed, married, more okay than he was in 1995, visiting his own creations and stating, "Enough," letting them go, writing them out of the cycle. The film concludes not with another start, but with an actual end, with a true completion of the cycle and a departure from it. And its tone is not triumphal, really. It is gentle. It is the tone of someone who has played this game long enough, who has gone through multiple iterations, who has finally, positively, and actively decided to stop playing it. This is how the active force appears at the point of the transition from the reactive. Not the triumphant conqueror, not the master of the final boss, but someone who can say, "I have experienced this enough to know how much it will cost me, and I have chosen to lay it down from a place of abundance rather than exhaustion." The distinction between Flowey, exhausted, depleted, and unable to escape the reactive, and Anno in 2021 is that one keeps negating, hurting, and killing others to maintain himself, while the other comes to assert himself positively and thereby come to a conclusion. Now, there is something I would like to say about what New Game Plus is not, because I believe that contrasts are quite important. New Game Plus is not grinding. Grinding is repetitive activity based on the accumulation of a quantity. You repeat an action until some number increases, and once that number reaches a certain threshold, you may continue. While I do not object to grinding as such, it is not what we are discussing here. Grinding is simply time viewed as a resource. New Game Plus views time as a form. It is also not nostalgia. Nostalgia is repetition that involves going back to the past, returning to what was, recovering the original state, being back at the start as though the start is available again. Everyone who has begun a new game of their favorite game believing they could recapture the thrill of the first experience will hit a wall. You cannot return. The start is no longer available. You are no longer the person who first played it. New Game Plus acknowledges this. It does not provide you with a return to your first experience. Rather, it provides you with another perspective toward your return. Finally, New Game Plus is most certainly not the same thing coming back. This is the incorrect view, according to Deleuze, which misinterprets what Nietzsche had intended. The same cannot come back. It is difference which comes back. It is the becoming, the transformation occurring during the transition between play sessions, which New Game Plus is founded upon. The plus sign is not a qualitative indicator. It is not stating same game but more stuff. It is stating same world but a different you. The difference between who you were and who you are, that gap, that transformation is composed of what makes up your return. Now, I want to return to Deleuze's three syntheses for a moment because I believe they map onto these same three cases in such a way that is too specific to ignore. Deleuze's first synthesis, the habit, the living present, what the body contracts, this is Sekiro. New Game Plus in Sekiro refers to what develops in your hands or your attention or your quality of focus through habit. This is the repetition at the level of the organismic present. The present becomes richer with each repetition of what has occurred within it. Deleuze's second synthesis, memory, or pure past, this is Undertale. The world possesses its own past that cannot simply be accessed or reset. It is not your memory, it is the world's. The past has its own depth, regardless of whether you recall it or give it a present. The structure of the game reflects an insistence that this depth exists and cannot be eliminated. Now the third synthesis, the eternal return, or the future, or the empty form of time, this is the rebuilds. This occurs when repetition has gone through both prior forms and reached a point after them. Deleuze states that in the third synthesis, the present merely serves as an instrument destined to be destroyed, and the past merely serves as a condition. What matters, or what is affirmed, or what truly returns, is the new. And that is what Thrice Upon a Time represents. Anno writing himself out of his own story, creating a work which stands independently of its creator. The synthesis of double affirmation, yes to repetition and yes again, translating yes into something which can stand alone. Now, I'll skip the model of the philosophy lecture and its three main ideas and how they relate to one another. I do not feel that the model is true or even accurate to the way these three concepts work together. I also believe that we have also done throughout this entire video an example of these three concepts that we have described. We started out with an understanding of what New Game Plus represents, perhaps as a type of benefit to playing a game or as a way of getting additional content for players who wanted more, or just another item on the menu to choose and not give too much thought to. Our thinking about New Game Plus changed, not by anything I said, which would have been the same explanations of New Game Plus from a variety of angles with different examples and scenarios. Our thinking about New Game Plus changed because it is producing variations in its own repeated nature. This is what Deleuze refers to as eternal return, the creation of diversity through the reproduction of difference. When we are finished, the idea of the New Game Plus will be different than when we first were exposed to it. And you will not be the same person as well. Something was produced in our process of passing through or thinking through. New Game Plus, the two words and one symbol, can be seen in the menu right now, waiting for us to pick them. And the fact is, you may never have considered any of this while you clicked the icon many times. The screen appears, you press confirm, the load bar shows progress, and then you find yourself back at the start. Same world, the same maps, the first boss, waiting as though nothing has occurred. However, you're not clicking on it today for the same exact reasons you clicked on it the last time. Even if it feels exactly the same as it did previously, same motivation, same motion, there is still something occurring through that action that was not present previously. The return is different than the departure. This is what the plus means. Not more content, not a reward for completing the previous game. It is the signification that something has gone through this space. A transformation has taken place. What is returning is not the departed. What returns is difference itself. What returns is something new.